Hello and welcome to another episode of wjlive powered by the Western Journal. I'm Joey Chester, manager of publishing operations at the Western Journal. I'm joined by Josh Manning, deputy managing editor for assignment at the Western Journal.
Hello.
And today it's a tough day. It's a tough day to work in the news. It's a tough day for the country, but it's a good day to have an important conversation.
Yep.
I think. Of course, yesterday there was a tragic school shooting in Texas. I believe the death toll is up to 19 kids and 2 teachers.
Yeah.
So it is the most deadly school shooting, I think, since Sandy Hook, which, gosh, was nearly a decade ago now.
Yeah.
So just tragic. What we know, the gunman who is deceased, he first shot his grandmother in the head over an argument.
Over a phone bill, right?
Over a phone bill. And from there, took his grandmother's truck and crashed it into a ditch behind the elementary school and proceeded to enter the elementary school. And we've now learned that there was, in fact, a school resource officer on scene at the school who could not stop him from entering the school, which I find a bit infuriating.
Yeah, there's going to be follow-up on that.
Yeah,
I mean,
the same thing happened in Parkland.
It's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any explanations. And in fact, this soon, with Parkland, I don't think we even knew that the guy had seemed to be cowering.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's what this guy was doing, but it is strange that if he was an armed resource officer, he couldn't stop an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Who was clearly in a deranged state of mind.
Yeah, so I actually watched the video. There's now video that's been released of when he's entering the school, and you can hear what sounds like gunshots as he's walking into the school, like they're opening fire on him.
So maybe
I don't know where the school. I don't know why the school resource officer wasn't at the entrance of the school, and maybe he was
sometimes they patrol. Yeah, sometimes they patrol, and there are other places, or they're counseling another student.
So he entered the school and I guess opened fire on everyone in his way, and he eventually entered a classroom where he proceeded to kill, I think, every single person in that classroom. All the students that killed were 4th graders, all from the same classroom, and 2 teachers in that classroom. There was a story earlier about a hero girl, 4th grader. She had her phone on her and started to dial 911, and the shooter looked at the classroom and said, "You're all going to die," and then shot her. And her grandmother was described as just horrific, sort of best friends, covered in blood, sitting right. I mean, just awful. Barricaded himself in that classroom, and then it was actually a advanced, I think, tactical border patrol unit burst into the school and was able to take out the shooter. The border patrol agent was injured in the process. So that's what we know at this point. We know that the shooter had a very troubled past the last few years as a teenager. That's correct, right?
Yeah, as far as I know, yes. And I don't know how large that community is. I know that there were rumors of him sort of being known in the community as a little bit of a had a wire loose, or he's a loose screw or something. I think he had reportedly had been caught around town pointing BB guns at people.
Dressed in military gear at night.
Yeah. So there were, as is just so often the case with all of this, there were warning signs left and right. And in fact, Joey, are you the one who told me that school had a particular program in place that was designed to identify these people ahead of time?
Yeah, the school was using one of these new systems where they basically scan social media accounts of people, I think students in the district and people in that area, looking for the classic warning signs of a school shooter. And it did not detect that this guy was a school shooter, which, furthers the point that you've got to actually have school safety measures at school, because there's no law that's really going to ever prevent this from happening, unfortunately.
Yeah,
so you have to do school protection.
Yeah, Minority Report isn't a thing. You can't get pre-crime.
Yeah.
And it is just remarkable to me how it's remarkable to me what communities do now in the face of stuff like this. If you saw a kid acting like that back in the 50s or back in the early 60s, alarms would have gone off all over the place. This is not a well person. This is somebody who needs help. This is somebody who may need to be institutionalized. Mm-hmm. And now today we seem to be so afraid. We seem to be so afraid to do anything to address any kid who's acting different, because maybe that's just who he is. Maybe he's just expressing himself. There is a trait in humans that makes us super, and in animals too, that makes us super distrustful of things that are not like other things. So we're used to people behaving in a certain way. And when you see someone behaving in a very different way, that gets your attention really quickly. And the reason it gets your attention is because on a subconscious level, you realize, hold on, this person might be going through life with a very different set of rules than I am going through life with. And if he has a different set of rules, I may not be able to predict what he's going to do. But we have gotten this over the last 30, 40 years. We've gotten this tolerance talk beaten into us. And the idea is that when people act different, you should just embrace that. And that's wonderful. And that's them expressing themselves. And to an extent, maybe that's true. But there is also a reason that alarm bells go off in your head when you see somebody behaving really differently from what you're used to. And it's because they may be playing a different game than you are playing. And life is pretty fragile. And humans are capable of inflicting a lot of damage on each other. Look at this kid in that 4th grade classroom. People should have been looking at this guy and thinking, okay, there is something very wrong here. I mean, you remember Columbine and the trench coat mafia. Who could hear trench coat mafia and not think, why was somebody not watching these kids and dealing with it? I mean, they show signs.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of any case where this has happened where everyone involved just seemed completely surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there are some, but it certainly seems like an enormous amount of the time people are saying, yeah, something wasn't right with this guy. Something seemed a little bit different. Something was off about him recently. But we've got this idea that you have to be tolerant of everything, and it's not your business how anyone else lives their lives. And that is completely true until that person starts hurting other people.
Yeah. There's a much larger issue here, and the left doesn't seem to want to address it. Biden was on TV last night screaming at Americans like you and I and many of you watching. We're gun owners, saying that we're just paid off by the gun lobby. We're evil.
Yeah, I've never gotten a check from them, by the way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so we're paid off by the gun lobby. But they're missing the fact that Western society now embraces mental illness. They embrace
yes, and the nihilism that leads to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have this idea that men can be pregnant. You have the rise in transgenderism, and all of that is embraced, and you're not allowed to talk about these issues. So is it any surprise then, like you were talking about earlier, that we see people like, and I'm not saying like the left is fully responsible for this, but this idea that everyone's just allowed to be whatever they want and think and do whatever they want actually leads to things like this. And when life is totally meaningless, evil brews, and you see events like this, and there's something in common. And there's a lot of, you see a big trend. These shooters, they're young men. We are failing young men in America. Look at fatherlessness. You can't tell me that doesn't contribute to this. This kid, he was being raised by his grandparents. His family structure was gone, and there's no one that can tell me that didn't have an impact on what led him to do what he did.
Yeah, James Dobson with Focus on the Family has said, he's I think clinical psychologist. He has said that children, both male and female children, they learn a lot about the world from their mothers, but they tend to get their moral compass, interestingly, from their father, not from their mother. And so imagine the scenarios where you don't have men with a good moral compass in the home, let alone just men in general. Then what happens? They have to develop their own, and often it errs. But you're exactly right that, let's see here, how to think about this. We tell kids you can be whatever you want and not to let anybody else judge you, and follow your own guide star, follow your own desires. The problem is that most of us are not smart enough to do that. Certainly not as kids. We're not smart enough to know what's valuable and what's not. We rely on people who are older and wiser than we are to direct us toward things that are valuable. And if we don't have somebody doing that, what we will do is we will gravitate toward laziness, indolence, and selfishness, and self-destruction. And man, that is what you see all over the place right now. When I see a kid like this, I see someone who looks like he has just been in the presence of nothingness for weeks or months or maybe even years on end. There's no trajectory to his life. And look, I could be completely wrong about this guy. I don't know him. But based on what we're seeing right now, I would guess there was no trajectory to his life. He didn't have a plan for what he was going to do. He had not thought about what he could give to society. He had not thought about, man, if I don't take up my burden and if I don't work and contribute of the special gifts God has given me, then society's going to be worse for that. Yeah. There's all of a sudden going to be a missing piece of the quilt. I don't think he ever thought about that. And man, if you don't have something like that driving you on, whether it's that or the idea of having and protecting and helping a family succeed, or just personal ambition, if you don't have things like that, then an idle mind is the devil's workshop. Idle hands are the devil's playthings. And I think that goes back to what you were saying, evil brews, when you're not doing anything. Yeah. And I think we have a generation of people who they don't have to work because we are so successful. We are so wealthy as a society. Everybody has got a smartphone. Yeah. And if you've got a smartphone, you have just about all the entertainment that more entertainment than a single human being can stand every day right there in the palm of your hand. Why in the world would you go out and challenge yourself when you can just sit there like a bump on a log? We tend toward self-destruction. And my guess is that his family was just unsuccessful in getting him to be interested in more important things. And man, if all your life is just you and laziness and entertaining yourself the best you can, well, life is super painful. And that pain is a lot worse than the pleasure you get from playing with a smartphone all day, every day. Why not put yourself out of your misery? And why not inflict that misery on a bunch of other people?
Yeah, if you think about it, our culture, and since the destruction of our culture breeds school shooters. There's actually, I want to read a tweet for you from Matt Walsh, because he's talking exactly what you're talking about. He says, start with a boy, take away his father, sit him in front of a screen all day, feed him porn, feed him an endless stream of content, give him no moral formation, no guidance, no companionship, give him drugs, isolate him. That's how you make a school shooter. Rinse and repeat. Our culture is a factory just churning out lost, disturbed, broken, nihilistic people. They don't all become school shooters, but few of them amount to anything good. Then there's another one that I think this really points out how it's our culture that has brewed these school shooters. That has churned out these school shooters. Americans have owned guns since the Second Amendment was ratified and before. The average household firearm hasn't gotten much deadlier over the past several decades, and yet only now do we have regular school shootings. What changed? It's not the guns, it's the people and the culture that have changed. The Democrat narrative about gun control does not predict or account for the sudden rise in school shootings and other mass attacks. It's a narrative that asks you to ignore the entire 20th century up until about 1999.
Yep. Wow.
So it's a great point. The Second Amendment's been around for centuries now.
Yep.
And this wasn't an issue except for the last 20-some years. So what's changed? It's the culture. Who has pushed the culture to change? Who has taken over the institutions that have changed the culture?
Yeah, I mean, you see postmodernism coming to kind of its apogee, I guess, in the 90s. And all of a sudden, the culture is beginning to grapple with this idea that, oh, there's no truth, so anything goes. So I can do whatever I want to do. So why shouldn't I do whatever I want to do? And again, the problem is we're fallen, we're sinful. That means what we want to do tends us toward destruction. I ate a ridiculous example of that is that I ate 12 Reese's sticks in about 10 minutes before coming on the show. That is stupid, and I enjoyed it, and it will end up killing me. We don't naturally go in the right direction. And without the idea of faith, without the idea of the Ten Commandments, without the idea of Judeo-Christian values, all you do is just float out there. And we live, it's the weirdest thing, folks. I am convinced that there are incredibly just magical culture at this point. And I say it's magical because we live in Phoenix. I can go to a restaurant 5 minutes from here and say one word to a waiter, and in 10 minutes I have shrimp from the ocean in front of me. That's magical. I can flip a light and I've got full illumination for the whole evening. That's magical. We live in a magical time when people don't really have to do anything. And we won't do anything if left to our own devices. In the past, you had to actually work to survive, and you had to come together as families, and you had to come together as communities. But now we are so wealthy that collaboration isn't nearly as necessary as it used to be. And it is, I am convinced, it is causing us to kill ourselves and to kill others. There's no, life is really hard. And I know I sound like some emo geek, but life is painful. Life is super painful.
It is suffering.
And man, if you are not working for something bigger and greater and more important than just you, then there is no point to enduring that pain. And I think that is the calculation that a lot of these people are making.
Yeah. And I want to shift to talking about solutions. How do we move back? Because clearly it's an issue. We cannot allow this to go on. I mean, there's been 4 major shootings in the last couple of months. We had the New York City subway shooter. We had the church shooter in California.
He was out on cash bail, by the way,
Yes.
the New York subway shooter.
Yes.
Thank Democrats for that.
Yes. And we had the Buffalo shooter, which
Thank communists and leftists for that.
and red flag logs.
Oh,
did not stop anything. And then we just have this horrific school shooting. And I think Democrats are getting this all wrong. And I actually think, and this may sound extreme, I think Democrats are evil in their solution for it. So I want to play a quick clip from Tucker Carlson last night. He's responding to Biden's speech, which is in typical Biden fashion. He could have united the country in a time of tragedy. Instead, he chose to be a very divisive and angry man, which is not a good look, and does the opposite of unite. So let's play Tucker responding to Joe Biden.
President of the United States, frail, confused, bitterly partisan, desecrating the memory of recently murdered children with tired talking points from the Democratic Party, dividing the country in a moment of deep pain rather than uniting. His voice rising, amplified only as he repeats the talking points he repeated for over 35 years in the United States Senate. Partisan politics being the only thing that animates him. Unfit for leadership of this country.
Unfit for leadership of this country. I think that's totally accurate. So whenever a shooting like this happens, the left all of a sudden pretends they care about kids. they don't care about kids. These are people who have allowed the murder of millions of children for decades now. So don't let them fool you that they care about children. The left is so evil that they see these shootings, we saw it as soon as Buffalo happened, as an opportunity to push their radical gun agenda instead of talking about real solutions and recognizing that their positions and their destruction of culture have actually led to things like this happening.
Oh, yeah. So there's a complete abdication of responsibility for their actions.
Yes. And instead, they want to demonize a large majority of the country, their gun owners, and say that we're evil and we don't deserve to protect ourselves. And they are fine with having their armed security in the Capitol and their
yes.
But they totally want kids that they claim to care about being in gun-free zones, which are what you would call soft target. And we actually have a statistic that we'll put up a graph of mass public, and this is 2019, this is the most recent data, mass public shootings in gun-free zones. 94% in gun-free zones. Only 6% in not a gun-free zone. And so I think gun-free zones shouldn't exist. And I actually think the solution to these school shootings is not all that complicated. I mean, of course, there's a larger cultural shift and there's a mental health crisis that we have to address.
Yeah, you've got to solve the thing underneath the surface, what's causing this, but you can get at the proximate cause, which is the gun, which is the shooter.
Yes. And I think it's Andrew Pollock, his daughter Meadow was killed in the Parkland shooting in 2018, and he proposed 3 solutions. 3. It's very, very not complicated. Armed guards,
no-brainer.
Single point of entry, which is locked, not just left unlocked.
Yeah.
And teacher training. My goodness, I can't tell you the number of posts I saw from sheriff's offices today offering to give free training to teachers on how to handle a firearm and self-defense. That's it. That's all it would take. And what has Congress been doing? I mean, even since the Buffalo shooting happened, they sent $40 billion off to Ukraine. They hold hearings on UFOs. They don't care about your children. We have abortion still in the country. If they cared about it, they would take that $40 billion plus other foreign spending and redirect it, I don't know, to giving grants to local school districts so they can get armed security and redoing doors so that they can have a single entry into the school, allowing teachers to carry guns. It's not that complicated.
It's so sad because we don't think in terms that we should. In Israel, they think in terms of terror attacks. They design their infrastructure around that. We don't think like that. Years ago, when I was with the sheriff's department and where I lived back home, we did quick response training, active shooter training, and we used a local school for it. And we did it at night when nobody was in there, and then on the weekend. And man, if you had been trying to design a school that was easier for a school shooter to use and harder for law enforcement to use, you couldn't have done better than this school. It was a nightmare. It's an utter nightmare for law enforcement. It was just fantastic if you were a school shooter. There were a million places to hide, all kinds of blind corners, places you could corner kids. It was horrible. But we don't even think in those terms, sadly. And some of that's natural because for most of the life of the country, we haven't had to think in those terms. Yeah. But when you start killing off the country's culture systematically and killing off bedrock principles and truth and ejecting God and those things, then, you probably do need to start thinking in terms of, man, really bad stuff's going to happen. We need to figure it out. Yes, training for teachers, arming teachers. I had some friends in law enforcement there who got into law enforcement because they were teachers and they wanted to become deputies where they could carry in school, and carry they did. And some of them went on to law enforcement full time and loved it. But yes, arming teachers, that doesn't mean you have to force every teacher to be armed. But man, give them some kind of resources. This idea that we're going to cower and hide and just hope that the person goes away, that the shooter goes away, and that law enforcement gets there quickly, because I think it's 90-something% of the time the shooter suicides when he hears law enforcement show up. This idea of just hoping for that is, that's pie in the sky. That's you don't bet your life on something like that. You arm responsible people, and they have to. That is what's just unbelievably amazing about all of this. Talk about a group of people that infantilizes human beings, the left.
Yes.
What in the world would make someone think that life is such that you shouldn't have to fight for your life? It's a shame that we have to fight for our lives, but that is characteristic of life.
Yeah.
That it is fragile and we have to fight for it, and you better be the hell ready to fight for it. And these holier-than-thou leftists think for some reason they're above that. We shouldn't have to fight for our life.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. We shouldn't.
No.
It would be great if we didn't. But we do. That's the nature of life. That's the nature of either being fallen or it's the nature of evolution. Take your pick. Either one of them, that's the nature of life. We have got to grow up, stop acting like 4-year-olds playing house, and say, you know what? Bad things happen. There are monsters out there. I may run into one of those monsters one day, and God help me, I may run into one of those monsters when I'm in a class full of kids I'm charged with protecting. I better toughen the hell up and be ready. But that is not at all the response. The response is so opposite of that. The response is to cower, to fear. We'll see if we can disarm the monsters. Look, disarming the monster doesn't make the monster go away.
Yeah.
He just finds other methods. If you go to westernjournal.com a little bit later today, you're going to see a story about a mass shooting in Norway. But it wasn't a mass shooting with guns. It was with a bow and arrow and with a knife. 5 people died. You can't kill monsters by just taking guns out of their hands. They are still out there, and they are still coming to hurt people, and you better toughen the hell up.
You cannot legislate the evil out of people's hearts, but you can protect yourself against it.
Yes, and that is life. Everything in life tells us that. The whole written history of humanity tells us that.
Yes.
Why would we be so stupid as to believe that suddenly, we shouldn't have to protect ourselves?
Yeah.
There's no reason for that at all.
And every single...
It's a lie. It's a lie from the left. Yes. It is a lie from the left.
They're evil.
You shouldn't have to do this. It is an evil lie from the left. And it is really hard to see where the lie where the ignorance stops and the lie begins. Because some amount of this is ignorance. They have been taught in colleges and in graduate schools that everything is environmental, and if you just put people in a good environment, man, they will be saints. That is not the truth. It is absolutely not the truth. You can take people who were born in fantastic environments, had everything handed to them, had a silver spoon in their mouths, and they turned into wretched, horrible monsters. And you can take people who grew up in absolutely horrible conditions and turned into incredible people. The nature of life is that it is fragile, it is fleeting, and there are people out there who are coming to take it. You better be ready. And the left tells you you shouldn't have to do that. Do not listen to them. They will get you killed.
I mean, how many times, and it's horrific, and the teachers who do this are really brave, we've seen shootings where people throw themselves in front of other human beings to stop bullets from killing. I mean, imagine if teachers could just arm themselves. And by the way, every single law that the left wants to pass nationwide has been tested and failed in every major blue city in America. Chicago. More Americans died in Chicago last weekend than were killed in the Texas school shooting yesterday. You don't hear a word from them. The laws failed there.
And they're all black
nationwide. Yes,
they're all black,
and they can't use it for political gain.
Yep. When you look at the racial breakdown on urban violence like that, it is overwhelmingly black. I believe most of the children involved in this were white or Hispanic.
Some of them Border Patrol agent kids too. Just terrible.
So look, folks, the thing is, it's not about protecting kids. If it were about that, they would be all over Chicago. They would be all over New York. They would be all over these places where horrible things are happening to to kids and particularly to urban youth. It's not about that. It is about having control. It is about taking responsibility away from people. It is about infantilizing people. That's how you get to this situation where a teacher would think, ooh, a gun. I don't want to have that in my classroom. It's infantilization. Why don't you want that? Why in the world would you not want the ability to protect your students?
Yeah.
Are you that infantilized that you're afraid of the one device that can actually put you on even ground with a shooter? What world are these people living in? It is a fantasy world.
Democrats do not care about your kids. They want to use kids to elicit an emotional response, all for political gain and power.
Yeah, and it's and it is an anti-gun agenda.
Yes.
Clearly that's what it is. It is an anti-gun agenda. That's the reason that they're not interested in actually fixing these things. If they were interested in fixing them, armed guards, police substations in schools, better designed schools, armed teachers, all of those things. They're not interested in those things, folks. And in fact, you remember what they did a couple of years ago? Ilhan Omar, Elizabeth Warren, they voted to defund police in schools. These people are complete and utter frauds. You want to talk about evil? Those are two leaders in the Democrat Party who voted to defund law enforcement in schools on a federal level. They were trying to take them out. They were trying to minimize law enforcement participation in schools across the country.
Replace them with counselors.
With counselors. It is. I mean, look. If you're looking out there and you're thinking, oh gosh, the two parties are the same. Oh gosh, leftists and conservatives, they're really the same. Let me tell you something. No, they are not. One is a group that is interested in life and freedom. The other is interested in tyranny, control, and death. That is it. Put it down big, plain, and straight. And man, you better remember that when you go to the polls in November. This has got to change. There is no reason. Israel has armed people all over the place. There is no reason we can't do the same thing, except that the left stands in the way. And the more they do that, the more innocent kids will be victimized and die. And if it doesn't happen from a gun, it's going to happen from a knife or a bow and arrow or a bomb or a car being run through a crowd or any number of other things. Yeah. This is life. It is so unfortunate. It is sad, but we are fallen. Christ is the only hope for redemption. And look, it ain't going to get better than this on this side of eternity.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind as you go forward.
Yeah. Josh, thanks for the great discussion today. Thank you all so much for watching. We know tragedies like this are really hard to deal with, but here at the Western Journal, we're trying to help you process these horrific events, and we're trying to show you who the left really is, and we fight for that every single day. And it's not easy. We're in a battle against big tech and other forces. If you want to support the Western Journal further, please go to westernjournal.com/join. We are a small family-owned company, and like I said, we are always battling the left and big tech. Again, thanks for tuning in today. We are here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you back here on Friday.